Now in its open beta, Rogue Company is a triumph of engineering for one simple reason. It's a 60 frames per second shooter on every console including Nintendo Switch. This comes from developer First Watch Games, a part of Hi-rez Studios, who achieved a similar feat with Paladins a few years prior. At the time, Paladins blew us away for matching the 60 FPS of PS4 and Xbox One versions, where similarly styled games like Overwatch only pushed 30 FPS on Switch. Today then, Rogue Company adds to a very short list of third-person shooters on Switch to actually gun for 60. It's an Unreal Engine 4 title too, and one that's remarkably built with crossplay factored in from launch. And so, Switch users can freely play alongside any other platform. So how does it play? And how is this made possible on portable technology? Let's find out. In action, it must be said Rogue Company is a hybrid, a mixture of mechanics from the industry's best. Matches are 4v4, forcing you to select from a roster of agents, each with a unique loadout that can be upgraded during a game. You have the ducking and rolling of games like Uncharted, the skydiving of Battle Royale favourites like Fortnite, and then the per round weapons upgrading of Counter-Strike. It's a melting pot, yes, but a well executed one. All combined, it creates something of its own flavour, wrapped in the fiction of covert agents setting up and defusing bombs across the world. Maps take Bond films for inspiration too, from quaint Italian villages on mountainsides, to favelas, to the gloss of an Abu Dhabi skyscraper, complete with zip lines and laser beams. There's a welcome playfulness to it. As far as world building goes, it's pretty skin deep so far, but it's a fun change of pace. That's the setup. The standard mode is demolition, alternating between attack and defense, where you have one life per round to stop or set up a bomb. The skydiving part at the start feels a little bit extra, I'll admit, but then it does eventually justify itself over a few rounds, because it gives both squads a kind of chance to ping a spot on the map and then coordinate a push down one side, so it does work out. Curiously, it's this skydive mechanic that pushes the Switch version hardest. See how it all runs at 30 FPS as we fly down? That swaps to 60 FPS the moment our agent's feet hit the ground, which is how it runs for the rest of the time. All other machines just render this part at 60. Anyway, we'll get to that a bit later, but it's one of many concessions First Watch Games has made to getting the Switch version running well.
Enemies have control of the objective.
Speaking with the studio directly, it turns out getting crossplay to work on console was a huge priority from day one, involving an entirely new server backend. However, it also leans on the scalability of Unreal Engine 4 to adapt to a console like Switch to make it fair and balanced for online play. I suppose a big example is in the image quality, the resolution targets per machine. In every case, Rogue Company uses temporal anti-aliasing, even Switch here. It introduces some banding artifacts, but overall does a great job of decluttering noisy, jagged edges. The exception is portable play on Switch, which swaps to a more basic FXAA setting. It makes everything much clearer on that 6-inch display, but the downside is a lot more of those edges just get missed, so it looks a little bit raw. The values then, lowest to highest. On Switch, while docked, we have a dynamic 1600 by 900. At least that's the highest value I've found looking right up at the skybox, where rendering load should be minimal, so let's take 900p here as the in theory maximum. In battle there is some flexibility though. Switch drops to 1120 by 630 lowest, or 58% on each axis. First Watch Games tells me it went to great lengths to avoid dramatic pixel count drops to salvage 60 FPS performance, and overall it still holds up just fine. The fact maps are based on close quarters shooting helps. Every segment of a map is contained in a way, walled off to make long distance sniping less of a feature. Image quality on Switch isn't the sharpest, but for the game's style, it doesn't affect much on a competitive level. Portable play on Switch meanwhile is carefully tailored. Usually we get similar visuals between portable and docked play for its games, barring a drop in res maybe, but Rogue Company moves the goalpost more obviously. First off, it runs at a native 720p, and I've barely noticed any major dynamic res drops under that. Despite ticking along on a lower GP clock speed while portable, a lower preset for shadows does seem to help mitigate load. See how character shadows run at a low resolution here, with no filtering. compared to the baked-in environment shadows nearby. It's a downgrade just for portable play. Moving to docked mode meanwhile, character shadows produce a similar softer look to the terrains. Add in the change in anti-aliasing setting from temporal to FXAA, and there's quite a difference between Switch's two playback modes. The next step up in visual quality is Xbox One S. Honestly, the jump here is remarkable. The console runs at a native 1600 by 900 and even under load doesn't seem to drop based on testing. Next there's base PS4, which pushes, you guessed it, a native 1080p that rarely deviates from that number. Settings between these two are identical otherwise, but clearly Switch gets left behind in several key areas. Let's take a look at comparisons against the base Xbox One. Textures take a huge hit, alongside the filtering quality on Switch. And of course, it's hard to miss the huge drop off in quality for alpha effects. It's also notable that all versions use a form of geometry culling, optimizing for rendering load by only drawing what's visible to the player. Check this out, see the flickering on Switch as we turn each corner. All of this is a huge saver on GPU load for the console. On Xbox One and PS4, this culling effect is less strict. You'll catch very occasional flashes as textures load in as you turn a corner, while some objects pop in just ahead just after landing. But on Switch, well, it's hard to ignore. Every turn as we first navigate this village seems to trigger a small perceptible flicker as new assets are drawn in. It's a sign of smart memory management, working around a 3.5GB profile of usable RAM, and a far less powerful Tegra X1 GPU to squeeze as much detail as possible onto the screen. Going back to the side-by-sides, you'll also notice shadows are low resolution on Switch's DockPlay 2. A lot of nips and tucks then, but the bottom line is none of it really affects the way it plays. There are a few other key workarounds for Switch. One of the big ones is the axing of screen space reflections. See how a skydive into the Skyfell map shows effects like SSR, and the quality of water shaders are dropped entirely. You have low resolution alpha for splashes on bullet fire, but all the extras around it are removed. A make do reflection is added on Switch with cube mapping, a flat opaque texture that appears at a side angle, but that's it. The team at First Watch also explains that it's using baked volumetric light map data to save on GPU load, meaning you'll rarely see environmental objects cast moving shadows. Speaking of which, Switch's 3 available CPU cores also had to be carefully worked around for physics on characters. Multi-threading is used, where cloth simulation is approached in a unique way for the machine using previous frame data to produce the results you see. There's also unique shader work for characters and environments going on all round that takes advantage of Switch hardware, but clearly materials take a cut in detail. The work going into Switch still produces a fine looking game, at least relative to other shooters on there. I've always enjoyed covering ports to Nintendo's handheld for this very reason. It's never truly about what looks better, we know the answer already. The value is in seeing a portable console get close enough to the Xbox One or PS4 experience with a competitive footing for online play, and that's what First Watch Games has pulled off here. Indeed, the game runs on Sony and Microsoft's consoles at settings mostly aiming at PC's Ultra preset, with some cutbacks in shadows and post effects compared to the absolute max setting. Rogue Company seems to scale most adeptly though between Switch and PS4, but of course the enhanced machines have a few advantages too. PS4 Pro, for example, is boosted to 1440p, while if we move over to Xbox One X, there's a jump to a full 4K. The real test here though is whether all 5 console experiences can hit and hold 60fps. $60fps then, the enhanced consoles both do it with barely any struggle. PS4 Pro runs fluidly along even in the most hectic battles, even from the demanding skydiving at the start, which has switch locked to 30fps, we're getting a pretty straight 60 here. I've tested a handful of maps on Pro and it's pretty clear cut, and likewise on Xbox One X. The turnout is more or less consistent between the two, with resolution the only real dividing point. A success all round, but I do get the sense these versions are almost overkill in pure GPU power for what the game is intended for. To see any real strain, we'll have to look at the base consoles, and even then, looking at base PS4, there's not a lot going on to suggest a huge problem hitting 60. That is with the exception of one area.
Reinforcements remaining.
PS4 is a really solid performer. That being said, I did spot one anomaly, as an open beta Rogue Company still got a few glitches hanging around, more so on Switch but not strictly limited to one machine. Optimization isn't watertight, and maps like Factory show performance slowly deteriorating over the course of several rounds. It starts off fine on base PS4 but eventually descends into the 40 to 50 FPS range at this contact point. Add in a few smoke bombs and well, this is the turnout. Still, this is far from indicative of how most maps play out, just an outlier I caught on capture. The same applies to base Xbox One in theory, again a solid 60 FPS level of performance all round, though as yet I've not bumped into any major issues. All of which brings us to Switch, and in particular docked performance. I've noticed portable play is far smoother all round, but hooked up to a TV with dynamic 900p, improved shadows and TAA in place, there are some more obvious drops from 60 FPS. As a baseline, it's reasonable to say it has a pretty tight lock in 1v1 encounters. Add any more to that though, plus grenades, and you'll certainly catch drops to the 50 FPS region at times and possibly under. It makes you wonder how far the frame rate would have dropped during the initial skydive sequence, hidden as it is by a 30 FPS cap. It makes perfect sense to use this given the full view of the entire map, and that choice to lock at 30 here has zero impact on regular play. Most of the time we're looking at a 60 FPS game then, but do expect some drops. My main takeaway on the performance front is Switch is in the right place majority of the time. It's been optimised, pinched and pulled, pruned back in as many places as possible to get it to this state, and the result is worth it. The game runs at 60 FPS convincingly, and it puts it on an even enough playing field to the other consoles while online. It's not perfect of course, we're looking at drops in performance and a hit in resolution too when battles really ratchet up the effects, but these are the extreme cases. Overall, the turnout is really impressive. Rogue Company's focus on Switch really has paid off. All of these performance results speak to the huge work First Watch Games put into Switch. Factoring it in from the project's start will have no doubt helped, and the crossplay and cross-save features add enormous value to it. Now this open beta isn't exactly squeaky clean in terms of glitches, and I've got to say Switch bears the brunt of the issues I've experienced so far. That includes 2 soft crashes to the front end over 4 hours of play. There's issues with ragdoll physics glitching out and textures failing to load in on dead bodies. And then we have one bizarre instance with a jumbo-sized gun overtaking the map. There's a lot of stuff here that obviously needs fixing, and I'm confident it'll get there with time. For now though, the game is genuinely well constructed with solid map balance, but do expect these rough edges in the open beta. Hi-rez Studios is treating Rogue Company as a long-term project, a platform for third-person shooting that it intends to grow over the years. The most striking thing about its delivery on console right now is how scalable it is. From up on high on Xbox One X to the Tegra X1 driven Switch, its Unreal Engine 4 really helps give it flexibility. Nintendo's machine gets a great workout with this one too. Even with the missing effects, it's one of the best looking 60 FPS games I've played on the console. And it also helps the core game design is just so solid, even this early on. I did of course ask the team about Rogue Company's future next-gen plans, and the response was rather tight-lipped. As for the use of ray tracing in the future, it's something the team has confirmed they'd like to look into, so long as it doesn't interfere with map balance. So put this one down as a possibility. Given resolution is the main way this game is scaled to X and Pro, having ray tracing could be an amazing means for PS5 and Series X to stand out. But again, we'll soon see. That's about all I have for today though. Rogue Company's been a surprise success for me and a definite recommend, accepting the glitches for the moment. If you did find this breakdown useful though, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell to get notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.
30 seconds to go. Keep it steady. Enemies have been wiped out. First round on me.